Hey everyone, and welcome to my channel and to this fun spring painting. And for today I have prepared again some flowers, and this time in a vase. I think, no, they're not daisies, not sure what flowers, how they call, some wildflowers, and I think these flowers are very easy to paint. I've also traced my sketch with the graphite paper because I usually sketch it on just a regular paper and not on my watercolor paper, as your watercolor paper can get ruined when using harder pencils or erasers. So I do tend to make my sketch on a paper and just trace it onto watercolor paper. And since the sketch then gets pretty dark, I use the artist eraser or kneaded eraser to lighten it. And I have also been asked from a couple of you, what is that kneaded eraser? And the one I'm using is Faber & Castell kneaded eraser. So there is a link actually down in the description box. You can also find it there, and if you're interested, just go ahead and check it out. And I did prepare a sketch for you, so I've made it for myself, so of course I'm gonna share it with you also. So you can find the link for that sketch in the description box down below, and please just don't mind if I forget to put it in. I'm having trouble with YouTube also these days, and for some reason part of my descriptions are missing. So if it happens again, please, I'm sorry, forgive me in advance, and just write a comment and I will fix it. But I do plan to put it down in description box so you can download it for yourself, trace it, and get started with me. First thing I did is pre-wet the part of the paper where I will be painting the vase, and after that I'm just using the mix of Ultramarine and Sepia to paint in the edges, and actually the right edge of the vase, because that part of the vase will be in a shadow, so it will be darker. And for me, somehow it is easier to paint it when the edge is on my left, and to go inwards to the right, because I'm right-handed. And that is the reason why I turned my paper upside down when painting the right edge. And after that I just left the paint to slide to the left, and I'm adding a couple of darker lines into my vase because, you know, the shadow works like that, and the reflection, this will be a vase that has a reflection on it, so I'm just adding a couple of those lines to mimic some reflection. And I did paint the left edge also just a little bit darker, just the edge, and I did not go inwards as I'm doing it on the right side. And you can just paint it as dark as you want. Your vase doesn't even have to be the same color as mine. You can paint it in yellow, you can paint it in green, blue, whatever color of your vase you want. My vase is actually white, and the color, that grayish color that I'm painting in with, is actually the shadow of the vase. After that, I'm just going with my round brush. After that, I'm just wetting the part just a little bit right and beneath the vase to add some shadows on the, well, I guess the table or floor, wherever that vase is. And when I wet it, I'm just tapping in some of the color and just letting it bleed. I've tint my paper just a little bit, and I'm letting that color to bleed and not really trying to paint in any particular shadow or painting the vase in the shadow, just leaving it like that, like those markings, and also in the color that I've painted the shadows of the vase. Next thing I'm doing is painting my flowers, and I'm starting with the centers of those flowers. For them I used a golden deep, and after that I've just painted the upper part of the center, and after that I'm going in with the sepia and painting the lower part and just letting one color bleed into another. And I did not pre-wet that center before I started to paint, because I will be using enough of paint and water, and they will, as they will bleed into each other. And right now I've picked up a little bit. I got those sepia was a little bit too dark for me, so I did pick up a little bit of paint, and then later on I just topped in again some golden deep. And after that I'm starting off with the petals, and them I'm first pre-wetting, and afterwards using Mother Lake Red Light with just a little bit of ultramarine in it, and then again topping the paint just near to the centers of the flowers and letting it bleed into the rest of the flowers. And since I don't want the harshest edges, and I do want the petals to have their shape, I just smudged in a little bit that paint from the center and going upwards into my petals, into the edges of my petals, and just giving it also just a little bit of paint and shading it a bit. Afterwards, I've noticed that that part was actually too dark for me, so I've picked up just a little bit of the paint. And the rest of the flowers I'm doing in the same way. So first I'm wetting the petals, then adding into the part nearest to my center, topping in just some paint and smudging it upwards. As you can see right now, I'm changing in between my brushes, the smaller round one and larger one. With the larger round brush, I'm pre-wetting the petals, and with the smaller, I'm just adding the paint and then smudging it a little bit. And you can do this actually with one brush, you don't need two brushes, but for some reason, maybe because it's too hot in my studio, the water on my paper dries pretty fast, so I am switching in between those two brushes, because I want on one brush to have some paint and the other brush water, so it gets quicker for me. That is the only reason why I'm doing it, none other. And if it doesn't happen to you, if your water doesn't dry so fast, you can just use one brush, pre-wet it, add a little bit more paint, then tap in and smudge it a little bit, then rinse your brush, pre-wet again, and go on like that until you finish. As I said, I'm just switching in between those two brushes because I want one with a clean water and other with a pigment, and it's just faster, and the water on my paper doesn't dry so fast, because as I said, for some reason, and this is a very small area, so I'm not adding too much water to the petals, so that is probably the reason why it's drying so fast. And after finished with the first layer, I'm adding in second layer, and I'm again doing the same thing as I did with the first layer, pre-wetting the petals, then topping in some pigment and smudging it. When finished with my petals, for now, I'm just using sepia to tap in the shadows and darker parts onto my center of the flowers. So I'm just tapping that sepia nearest to my petals, and also just going upwards into the center of the flowers. And afterwards, again, just while my petals are still wet from the second layer, I'm just adding a little bit more of that pigment just nearest to the center. And you know, maybe those petals are dark enough for you just after the first layer. You don't have to do a second layer then. And if you're happy with how dark they are near the center, and if you're not, you can just add as many layers as you like, doing the same thing as we did for the first and for the second layer. We will add later on just a little bit of darker color, actually sepia, nearest to the center, so just keep that in mind. They don't have to be as so dark as you think they should look at the end, because we will be adding a little bit more of the shadows with sepia and also a little bit of highlights with white gouache. And I decided I wanted them to, well, to be smudged just a little bit to look smudged to those flowers. You can skip this step if you want. And so I've pre-wetted the paper around the petals, just right on the right side of the petals, and then tapped in that same color I used for painting the petals, and just turning my paper so the color can bleed. And I will also add it to the third flower, but just a little bit less than for those two that are on the right side. Now that the paint completely dried and my paper is dry, I'm just adding the stems of the flowers, and for that I'm using green and also script brush, because I want those stems to be very thin. And if you have a round brush with a very pointy tip, you can do it with that round brush, or maybe angled brush, whatever you like to paint thin lines. And whatever you use to paint thin lines, you can just use it here. As I said, I do really want them to be very thin, so I've decided to use a script brush. And now I'm adding just a little bit of sepia to make it a little bit darker and to make it appear as though some parts of the stems are also in the shadow. I also decided to paint some greenery next to the flowers, so I've pre-wetted the part where I'm gonna paint that greenery, because I do want to paint first on a wet paper, because I want it to smudge a little bit and to be, when it dries, to be a little bit blurred. Later on I will add it on top of it, the one that will be focused and won't be blurred. And as mentioned earlier, now I will be adding those shadows nearest to the centers of the flowers on the petals, and for that I'm using a detail brush, because those shadows I won't be now painting wet on wet as I did earlier, but I will just paint them as little lines, and I'm painting it dry on dry actually, because this brush really doesn't have a lot of water, only pigment in it, and it's a detail brush, the brush that it also can't hold much water. Again, as everything before, you can actually again paint this with a round brush that has a pointy tip. Just keep in mind not to take a lot of water in it. Just when you rinse it, dry it on your paper, then pick up some pigment and do those lines. Now I will be using a white gouache to do some highlights, and the highlights I will be doing on the top of the centers of the flowers and also on the petals. And for the petals I will be painting the highlights on the end part of the petals, the one that is further from the center, and also doing the lines, and as I did for the shadows. And as you can see right now, I'm not using water at all. I'm just using a white gouache directly from the tube, so that it stays white and not watered. for that greenery. Now I'm using green and I added just a little bit of sepia into it, and I also decided to do a bit more of them than I've painted earlier, and I will do a couple in the middle of my arrangement. Now I am wetting again that right part of my paper and upper part of the paper with just a clean water, and then splattering some Mother Lake Red Light and Ultramarine, the mix of those two colors, a little bit of green also, and just letting it bleed again while mixing it with water. And also I've decided to add a little bit of Naples yellow to just add some contrast to the colors. And after finished with my flowers, I'm going back into my vase, and I did decide to add a little bit more color to it, and also that to highlight a little bit more of that shadow. So I'm going on the right side with a little bit more of the pigment and then smudging it. I will also add on the middle part a little bit more highlights, a little bit more shadows, and just to make it a little bit more believable. And with those last couple of details, and also again some more splattering, but this time on a dry paper, I'll be finishing off this painting and also this video. Thank you a lot, guys, for watching. I hope you had fun. I hope you will maybe try this one. You can see it's very, very easy and fun. And if you like it, please hit the like button, comment, share it. And if you haven't still, please subscribe to my channel. Make sure also to hit the notification bell. That is the way you'll make sure not to miss any of my future videos. And guys, without further ado, well, I hope I'll see you next time. Bye!